we're talking a lot about health sector reforms. The question is, what do we need the sector reforms? Sometimes, they are political, sometimes they are technical, sometimes they're necessity, sometimes it's a matter of life and death. And we come and design a beautiful strategic plan. Exactly. This is what we're going to do. And then nothing happens. And then 5 years later, nothing moved. And then we say, okay, what happened? What's wrong? Just to give you a little story. See, this is one of the feedbacks. Somebody said that you would like to hear more stories from real life. My good friend and colleague who was director of health insurance fund in Croatia is now consulting, and he was in one of the African countries. And he got this strategic plan on strategic purchasing. He loved it. It was beautiful. And he shared it with several countries. That was nothing. And they said, wow, what a wonderful reforms. So he went back to that country and he met the ministry and said, how's the reform going on strategic purchasing? And they said, what is strategic purchasing? It was not even designed by us. It was designed by some consultant. It was a beautiful plan, but nothing was implemented. So just think about this. When you design these plans, when you design your reform, one thing that Michael will talk about today later on, is it feasible? Who will do it? Okay, let's do contracting. Do we have people who know how to do contracting? Not always, right? What has to happen in the meantime to make this reform happen, right? So the key message that I will try to iterate through this presentation is that implementation matters, and there are some strategies that you can apply when you're thinking about organizational reform. So Nikki was focused on service delivery. What kind of service delivery things are there? Are they meeting your transition needs, epidemiological needs, and stuff like that? What are pros and cons? But how to make that shift? When I analyze the service delivery reforms around the world, they're tough. They're the last reforms to happen. It takes decades, not years, decades. Somehow, most of the fast-forward reforms are happening after conflict. You destroy everything and you don't. Not recommended way to do the reforms, okay? But in my country, we introduced community-based physical and mental health rehabilitation because all our mental health hospitals were destroyed. And that was one way to go. If we tried to do it step by step without the conflict, it would just not work. That's what you would expect. Too many stakeholders involved, too many people interested, and so on and so on. So with this introduction, what I'm trying to say is that in this course we are also addressing certain behaviors. We are addressing behavior of society, we're addressing institutional behavior, how they perform, through different payment mechanisms, through different strategies, and we are also going to be talking about changing behavior of individuals. And there's provider payment mechanism that Willie was discussing yesterday that influences providers' behavior very much. Regulations, health and all policies, media, propaganda, all of this influences behaviors of different things, but what I would like to focus today on is behavior of organization and what are the strategies. Some key topics. There are multiple providers, multiple stakeholders. They all have their interests. Any reform brings losers and winners. It's tough. It's the whole system approach that Mickey was talking about, rather than, oh, if you just do the training, everything's going to be fine. No, it's not. You have to create a system where organizations behave differently and make these changes within it. So to quote Mark, he was saying, he was teaching one course and one of his students said, Mark was asking this question, why this organization behaves the way it does and is producing what it's producing or not producing what it's producing. And the student says, because it's perfectly designed to produce what it's producing. If you want to change it, if you want to that organization to produce something different, maybe that organization needs to change its processes, its behavior, its incentives, and so on. And when we are doing health sector reforms, and we're supporting countries doing health sector reforms, this is one thing that we often forget. Let's do contract. Let's do performance-based payments. Let's do results-based payments. For a man with a hammer. Bang. Everything is a name. Who will do it? How that business process goes and where we are. This is a slide from Vicky's presentation. Does anybody recognize the country where this was taken? Okay. It could be in any country. And we're not going to say which country it's from, okay? Not to insult any of our friends. But if you really want to transport this load, this is a big truck, right? I mean, it's a huge truck. But you load it wrongly, it's not going to do your job. It's really going to flip over. So maybe you need something else. And then my favorite slide, which was actually on the wall of a Minister of Health in Federation, which is saying putting more resources into your existing framework will not necessarily yield the desired outcome. They have this donkey, and you're putting more and more. Why don't we integrate maternal and child health care with NCDs, and then we can do the TB, and then we can do HIV on top of it, and then something has to change, guys. Otherwise, this little donkey is not going to go anywhere. Okay, I'm passing mine. Okay, so let's do this organization control node and intermediate health, just to make some notes. All right, so efficiency, quality, and access. These are intermediate, right? You know this. Efficiency in public sector, less effective, less integration, managers are often physicians. You know all of these problems, let me not go. This is Jose. And this is how this organization is made. And I'll tell you the true story. And Mark was telling this story when he was teaching in China. So I was working as a young physician in Sarajevo, in the pediatric department on the second floor. And in the morning I noticed two big guys in a Bosnian guy. They came and started digging a trench like 40 centimeters wide, 1 meter deep, 30 meters. The whole morning they were digging, right? In the afternoon, Johan's laughing, he wants to manage it. Two guys came and they started filling the third back in. And I said, okay, what are you guys doing? I said, no, it's a cable for internet, you know, the optic wire, modern technologies. Where's the cable? I don't know, the guy who was supposed to be putting the cable didn't show up. I'm paid to pick it up, he's paid to fill it in. Everybody's doing his job. Okay? Think about outcomes. Efficiency. And by the way, Jose was fired because, well, if you take a look at the picture, the leak is not here, the leak is here. He's digging on the wrong place. He is not efficient. Right? He was fired. We don't want that. Now, quality. We discussed a lot about the quality, how your service is organized and how things are. One thing to remember, volume and quality of care are very closely connected. I was in Bangladesh and there's a lot of private hospitals and public hospitals. About 20% of public services are provided by public sector. The rest is NGOs, private sector. And my friend's wife was pregnant and she was about to deliver. Everybody said, no, go to public. Why? Because of the volume. They had a huge number of deliveries. They know what they're doing. Although the room in private hospital was 10 times better, and the food was great. And the quality of services is not just about the room and the food. So please don't judge our food selection based on what you need to see there, just based on the teaching, right? Let me rush. How does that affect our? This is countries of former Soviet Union, and the way they deliver TB services is really affecting multi-drug resistance. Here's the problem. You're detected by TB, you have to be isolated for 6 months. Everywhere else, once you're no longer contagious, after 3-4 weeks after you take multiple drugs, you can go back into community and continue your work. Keep using your drugs. Make sure you're using your drugs. But if you're locked in 6 months, what is happening? Come on. What do you think? Would you go to hospital for 6 months? Microphone. Who would volunteer if he has TB to go to hospital for 6 months?
No one would volunteer. So he goes underground, keeps on spreading the disease.
Nice. All right, but you love your neighbors, you really don't want to infect them, and you decide, okay, I'm going to go. So you go to the hospital for 6 months, you keep taking your drugs. What happens? Why?
Yeah, because you have contacts with other patients who might have, and it's highly possible that they have multi-resistant tuberculosis. To exchange your microflora, and it's the best way to grow the multi-resistant tuberculosis.
So,
very efficient.
okay, by the way, this is Ukraine. Then, okay, you still don't want to do that, and you decide to run away from the hospital. Then the police comes and arrests you. Where do you go? The jail. What's happening in the jail? What a wonderful way to organize your clinical services, right? So no wonder, out of 15 countries with the highest rate of multi-drug resistance in the world, all of them are important in former Soviet Union because of the way the services are organized. Just one example. Now, access. We talked about, Ellen talked about active access and physical access, and, right? We know that. Just to make fun. My colleagues from Australia. Emergency services, 100 miles away. Just to get to the phone. So this is a fake picture, guys. It doesn't exist, but it's just to make fun. 174 kilometers, that's 100 nautical miles, I guess. We will talk about Turkey on Monday. Unfortunately, Reka won't be there, but I was part of the Turkey reform, so I will present that case. It's very interesting. You know, many countries struggle with this issue of socialization of healthcare, that the services are close to your village. But if you have a village of 300 people, do you really need a health facility there? Or 500? Or 1,000? What's the cutoff? It's a good question. It depends what your disease is. You don't, but the disease happens. For example, if you're talking NCDs in terms of hypertension, you know who takes care of my diabetes? My nurse, over the phone. Hey, you didn't do your A1C in the last 5 months. I'm going to stop your drugs unless you come. How's your weight? or the text messaging. I just have to go and give some drop of blood and I'm fine. So it depends on your disease. But if you imagine, it's just in Bosnia, one of the small cantons, 23,000 people, and they have maternity ward. So they have 2 deliveries a week. Nobody wants to go there. Everybody goes to so-called enemy territories to deliver the people that are fighting against them because the services are better. Yeah. So having this proximity without volume and quality is not going to help you with the access, okay? Of course.
Just small comment about putting healthcare facilities in some areas, because if you have as a transport only a donkey, so you should consider how to reach the healthcare facilities, and maybe it's easier not to go than to stay at home and wait and pray than to cross the desert or this kind of difficulties.
Okay, let's discuss it. I hear this argument quite often. You know, Nadine, we have a very big country and a mountainous area, and it's very difficult to have access. How many countries are like this in the world? What do you think? Where there are no cars. Nobody has cars. In radius of 200 miles. Can anybody list some country in the world that has no car within 200 miles radius? I doubt. DRC? Some of them simply don't have access because there are no roads and cars. In 2002, my colleagues from Peru won President's Award for Excellence for reducing maternal mortality in Peru by 72% or 71%. Which sector was this? Transport, rural roads. They built roads, people got access. That's true. But then, the solution is not to put one good doctor in that village and wait for one patient a month. It's just not effective. Mickey talked about possible delivery models, but let's go now to the core of what I'm trying to do. Whenever you're doing your reforms of the institution, we recommend to have this checklist in the back of your mind. We call them 6 Ps. There are many other checklists, there are many other strategies, there are many other things, but this is just to have as a guide to think about. So if we want to do this reform, if we want to produce different process, what is the incentive to organizations? Why would health insurance fund go into company? Why would hospital agree to the company? Where is their incentive? We talked about that quite a bit. But the second one is where's incentive for the manager? When he said, okay, in China we are going to do this because the government said so. Right? But that's all official propaganda. But if the manager is not incentivized to do this reform, he's going to do everything to make it better. Right? He's the manager. He's the boss. Now, is he capable manager? Can he do it? Usually a doctor becomes a great manager. I'm a doctor. Managing. You lose good doctor, you get lousy manager, right? But do they have skills? And do they have attitude that is appropriate to different things? Can they do? Do they have autonomy? You have regulations that says this is the salary of the health workers, there's nothing you can do about it. There's no incentive payments. You're stuck. We can talk about provider payment mechanism, but this is your salary and that you get nothing out of it. So, is there autonomy? What's the incentive to the workers? The ones who are actually on the front line delivering the service. You can have a wonderful manager with skills and authority, but if the workers are not incentivized, so what? And what's their attitude and skills? All right, so this is a checklist just to go through some of the thoughts when you're doing the reform. And one thing I put down here, that there are a lot of underlying, or there are a lot of things that can help in this process. One is information sharing system, the other one is PFM, public finance management, if that's in order. We can help with in certain environments. It doesn't live on its own. And this is how it works. Incentives to organizations, incentives on managers, skills, incentives on workers, values will change the performance. Can anybody give me an example of where the reform stopped or didn't work because we didn't do this? Other things are happening.
Okay, so in Lebanon we have a primary care network that is not owned by the government. It is owned by NGOs, by municipalities, etc. It's a product of the civil war where public infrastructure was gone and these civil organizations came to the rescue and they did their own primary care centers. So when the government came and wanted to deliver primary care, we said, why build primary care centers and put all this capital cost? Let's capitalize on what's existing. So what we did is we made these NGOs part of our network, we regulate them, we monitor them, we give them all sorts of incentives like drugs, vaccines, etc. So when we did the project that Rawan was talking about in the morning, to deliver care to the poor, we incentivized those primary care centers. So we were giving the money to the NGOs to deliver care at the primary care centers to people. At the primary care center, we have the director who has a salary which didn't necessarily change. We have a nurse who has a salary which didn't necessarily change. We have a physician who works at fee-for-service basis with decreased rates because really his incentive to go to the primary care center is to recruit people to go to his private clinic.
Of course.
We did not set incentives. Until now, we're struggling on how to set incentives for each and every one in the primary care center in order to make this work. So no matter how much we followed up with the management, with the NGOs, with the director of the primary care center, you cannot follow up with the nurse, with the doctor, with the cleaner, with everyone. So it really put sticks.
Who has to do that? Is that Ministry of Health out? Within organizations? Much better than 10 years ago, when there was no contracting with NGOs and network, when Ministry of Health was struggling to deliver their own services and compete with others. So we will have a whole presentation on this actually on Friday afternoon. Your colleague from Lebanon, she's not here this morning, she came as participant, just like you was. And we had a little chat in the coffee break, and she explained me what's happening, and I thought, my God, this is so important. So I invited her to present Lebanon case in Libya. I was struggling with it. It was a system that was paying. It was not purchasing, it was paying. In Libya, you're paid as a doctor, you were paid as a doctor just because you're Libyan and you're a doctor, not just because you work. Right? And she came to Libya to deliver a wonderful presentation on Lebanon experience, and this year she's doing presentations. Okay? So that's a good example. Let's move on. Because I would love to spend a little more time on these factors. We try to divide it. I mean, there are many ways to talk about organizational behavior studies, right? This is just one of the ways that we try to simplify. Who does what? Incentive strategies and managerial strategies. I'll explain. We'll go each one by one. But just to have some structure, we group them this way. Who does what is very important. You do endectomy at the tertiary level. It's not good in this resource. It's not. If you have multiple delivery facilities, might not be the best. If you have primary care that does CAT scans, they will do a lot of CAT scans, particularly if it's for fee for service, right? If you buy them NMR, they will do a lot of NMRs. They will not just make it sit there. So by supplying and giving the inputs and organizing who does what, that really changes how the service is organized and how far do you go. You can do it through regulations, you can do it through internal regulations, you can do it through supplies. Big question, how do you provide services to rural areas? There are quite a few different ways. You can have a mobile teams, Monday this village, Tuesday this village, Wednesday that village, and you take care at least of chronic and semi-acute patients. Somebody has emergency, there's a helicopter, there's a car, there's donkey, there are other things. But this is where a lot of countries were struggling from. But actually a few days ago I talked to my colleague Ramesh. He's saying, indeed, actually now we are struggling with urban. More and more people live in urban slums and they don't have access. It's not about physical donkeys. It's about being able to pay, access, and being admitted. Privatization. That's also who does what. You let private sector, you can let private sector do specialized services, CAT scans or laboratory or diagnostics, right? It's also who does what. You can contract them to work with you, but you can also have a private fee-for-service walk-in clinics, and they will do their job at high cost, but these are some things we can do in who does what strategies. Incentive strategies. We talked a lot about them, right? How do you pay providers? How do they compete? Now, one of the arguments that we hear quite a bit is market competition. Let there be multiple providers to compete, and competition is good because it lowers the cost and increases the quality. Is that the case in healthcare? Okay. Does that work in healthcare? Market competition? So, for example, you have a heart attack and you're in Bishkek. You carefully select which hospital you want to go to and check the references, right?
So now, let's ask Nadine, from his personal experience, he can give you very good advice on where to call on if you have a heart attack in Bishkek.
There's one hospital. New Zealand wanted to do market competition for cardiac surgery. How many cardiac facilities in New Zealand? 4. It's difficult, and we talked about that yesterday, to have the market competition. It's good to have it as an idea, but it's really difficult if you have a single provider, particularly in rural areas. You have no choice, right? It works to an extent, but it has its huge limitations. Another strategy that we can think of is incentive-based budgeting. Did you hear about this? Okay. So quite a few countries I have been to, one of them is Kazakhstan, started incentives-based budgeting. So the Prime Minister makes a contract with Ministry of Health. So look, You want more money for health? Okay, this is what I want you to do. 1, 2, 3. You don't deliver? I got your budget. Next thing is, next year, the minister comes and said, oh, I want to do this, 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 and this. Okay, how much does it cost? And they estimated the cost, and the prime minister said, so what am I buying? So contracting happens not just between health insurance fund and provider, it happens also within government. Government is part of organization, right? Health system delivery is part of organization. It's a different structure, right? Different accountability, but it's part of one. It's part of regulation. It's part of public finance management system. Is it part of regulation really? Performance-based budgeting? Kind of. It's intergovernmental. So you think of regulation coercive way to correct behaviors and markets changing, but it's less of a regulation. It's kind of internal regulation that you do. But that's another incentive strategy. And I like to talk about this because one thing we keep forgetting in organizational control now is accountability. Who is accountable to whom for how? So let's start from the Prime Minister. So you have high rates of cardiovascular strokes or heart attacks from a few deaths. Okay. Minister of Health is supposed to take care of it. If he doesn't, is he really accountable for that, and how much? Particularly they are from the same policy. District level authorities, are they accountable to ministry or not? Hospital manager, primary care managers, are they accountable to district level? Are the family medicine teams or private or providers accountable for the outcomes? There's always missing one. So unless this accountability is very clear, it's going to be very difficult to achieve the results. We were discussing, it was 4 years ago, one of the countries, and the Prime Minister invited the World Bank, and he said, Nadim, do you think we should have social insurance or not? He gave me 3 months. It was Sunday, 10:30, 11 in the morning. We gathered in the hotel, locked the door, and the Prime Minister, 2 Vice Prime Ministers, Minister of Finance, Minister of Health, Chairperson of National Bank, 2 parliamentarian delegates, on top of the cabinet, in jeans, sweatshirts, sneakers. Sunday, okay. On our team, there were quite a powerful delegation, let's put it that way, including one of our colleagues from Germany. And the answer was, the Prime Minister, you really don't need the World Bank to tell you whether you need to. So that's it, I said, yeah. So what's the problem? I mean, we are there, we gather, which was something, right? So your problem is that you have 14 times more strokes than Germany, and 18 times more times, not percent, more heart attacks than Germany. You smoke less, you drink less, you exercise more, and your life expectancy is almost like in Bangladesh, and you have 15 times GDP per capita. All right? That's your goal. Really? So should we build more stroke centers? No, there's the primary care. There's nobody who measures your blood pressure, nobody to follow up. There's no accountability. Or, make a long story short, 6 hours later, they made the decision over the next 7 years, the budget for primary health care is going to double. They're going to pilot test this accountability for, and the total expenditure for health will go 2.5 times. Okay? So the focus will be to change everything. To catch people with diabetes and blood pressure. and two ladies from the parliament were sitting there, and one of them said, yes, my husband passed away when he was 52, in a heart attack, and the other one said, yes, mine passed too, he had stroke, he was 52. It was a total coincidence. Okay. Now, within government, you can have incentive budget. Contracting is basically contracting with providers, but also contracting brings accountability for the outcomes. And that changed also performance of your providers, but you can have other types of contracting. Any questions so far? Comments? Do you know this? Is this familiar? Tell me, is this familiar?
To some extent, yes.
Of course.
Yeah, but with international examples, real life examples, we really don't have many hypotheses like that.
Good. So you like the stories like this?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about many stories. Now, managerial stuff. Decentralization was one of the most famous. Now, let me quote my wife. Decentralization in democracy doesn't exist in her household. Okay, you have a single decision maker, and we all have to agree. But we had actually in several other courses the whole session, actually 2 or 3 sessions just on decentralization. Ethiopia was one of them. Ethiopia is very interesting and has very interesting service delivery models with rural posts and with community health workers, with community insurance. So anybody from Ethiopia would love to tell us just a few words about how that works, that decentralization? Yeah.
Actually, regarding the decentralization, like in Ethiopia, there are the federal government, the regions, and also the districts. So the districts are the lower level who are going to allocate the budgets and also lead and manage the primary healthcare facilities. So regarding the health service delivery modality, we do have the 4-tier system. And at the lower level, it's the primary health care, which includes primary hospitals, health centers, and health posts. So the health posts are stationed with 2 community health workers, we call the health extension workers, and they do provide a comprehensive health promotion, disease prevention, and selective curative services, including management of childhood illnesses. So these health extension workers are expected to serve around 1,000 households or 5,000 population at the community level, and they are the first contact of care for the primary health care. And they do refer patients beyond the level to the health centers, and the health centers to the hospitals. So these health extension workers are, currently there are around 40,000 health extension workers. And
40,000.
Yeah, 40,000.
Huge.
And
Well,
most,
100 million people in Ethiopia. Right?
yeah, 100 million. And most of them are female health extension workers selected from their community and who received a 1 year of training and also before service training. And during the in-service training, they also received integrated application training to improve their competence in service provision. So they are the first contact of care to the health system and as a gatekeeper.
Okay, but how does that decentralization work? Who are they accountable to? And who organizes that? Is it organized from Addis Ababa?
No,
No?
the decentralization workers, like the selection and recruitment of health extension workers is made by the lower level administration, we call it Kabale.
Okay.
And so they do select, recruit the health extension workers in collaboration with the district health officers, and they receive the trainings at the regional health science colleges, and their follow-up, their recruitment, the training, and their follow-up is managed at the district level, and at the lower managerial level, we call it Kabale level. So the federal level only, the federal government only works in the design of the curriculum and provision of budgets to the regions and districts, but The whole managerial level is managed at the state level.
Are you accountable to the federal level for the outcomes, for the results, or not?
We are accountable at the federal
Okay,
level.
but you do the job. So I want you to deliver these services.
Yeah.
How you do it, it's your business. You manage recruitment and stuff like that, but you're accountable for the outcome.
Yes.
That's good. You know, my boss doesn't ask me how do I do this, but he wants results. He wants the smiling faces. Hint. Right? You're not happy, he's not happy. I'm in problem. How do I do it? It's up to me. Okay. Now, a lot of people talk about the autonomy, hospital autonomization. Right? What do you think about autonomy? They closed 300 hospitals in Moldova, by the way.
Well, it's very controversial issue because it depends on many preconditions to ensure the real autonomy and to finally reach what is expected. So in Moldova we started the autonomy of primary healthcare centers. I think about 8 years ago, or something like that.
2009, I think.
Yeah, 10 years ago almost. And the main idea was to make much more right flexibility and of course in perspective of to decrease the burden of financial burden of the system. In reality, we face now some problems related to less capacities of some centers to run the cost and to meet the expected result. And also another problem, the lack of capacities and the brain drain because many family doctors are leaving because some centers have not capacity to have enough revenues and enough incomes to cover all needs. And one very important issue, which probably it's an impediment for also autonomy of some hospitals and in general of decentralization, if this is not combined with decision rights, which should be delegated in the entire spectrum of rights. For instance, the manager will have rights to keep the funds after the fiscal year, also to have the rights to fire and hire the workers, and also to have other rights. So without such decision rights, so real autonomy will not be reached.
Oh, wow. So you touched quite a bit of issues that I wanted to raise. So if the managers, remember 6 keys, do not have tools to manage, what are we talking? Autonomy to make the right decision and manage its stuff, just like you're doing it in Ethiopia at the local level, they will have a brain drain. People will leave. Nothing will change, right? So you have to have this tool to be able to produce desired results. But another thing that is important here, autonomy has to come with accountability. Autonomy does not mean no accountability. Right? This is where the catch is and where we so often fail to understand that you're accountable for the outcomes. We will give you the space to manage, we will give you the tools, but what we want from you is to play by our rules and win, which is not always easy. I like to cheat on the coast, sometimes, and we all do, but, and here's a good example.
Yeah, in Ukraine we've got a lot for a long time the regulation which strictly mandate the number of doctors, nurses per square meter of hospital and their salary. It came from the Soviet time, and just recently it's been cancelled. So doctors were unhappy because they are they couldn't have any flexibility in playing with salaries, in adding some money to good performers or whatever. Now that regulation is cancelled. Do you think they are happy? No, they are frustrated because they got used to be regulated, to know that their step is somehow stated in some documents, and now they are absolutely frustrated because most of them, some of them just 10%, maybe their entrepreneurship spirit, and they are, wow, I will pay my nurse who is doing the best, I will pay her 10 times more, and I will fire all these old pensioners who just waste space and money, and they demonstrated very good result. But most of doctors, they are still a bit afraid of doing some steps because they got used to be managed by MOH, and MOH says, no guys, no rules, just go ahead, do what you want, and we need to change the paradigm in their heads.
Good. So what you're saying is everybody loves reforms as long as they're not reforming. Good. So. And do we know any countries where reforms happen and doctors were immediately happy? Just kidding. There are a few.
Let me share with you new strategy of Albania. Only last year from Albania, the brain drain from doctors is about 300 doctors leave the country. And we think about to stop this leaving, let's say. And we use for the doctors one good bonus, annual, very high huge for the doctor. This is very good, let's say, because the amount at the moment is very beneficiary for the doctors, and we think we are in a good way to stop the brain drain for the moment.
Yeah. So, where do you work?
In the health insurance fund.
Health insurance fund. And she has the data of all the doctors that are leaving in the country. It's interesting. How many people live in Albania? 2,900,000. So roughly the same like in Bosnia, like in my country. Okay. I actually was doing some work with a friend of mine, colleague, Kiko, who's going to be here on Saturday. We're going to talk about human resources, and we did try to dig analysis. How many doctors are leaving from Bosnia? 290 last year. Yeah. The difference between Albania and Bosnia is that you know it in Bosnia. That's how the system is organized because it's too fragmented. 13 ministers of health and nobody has a big picture. See, at least you know and you can monitor from one level. This is also part of the organization and accountability and correct. Now, improving public sector performance. It's a huge area, but let's talk about it in light of public finance management because, I'm the World Bank, we believe in money, income is important. So, how do you do your budgeting? How do you do your planning? How do you do your estimates? How do you do your intergovernmental budget transfers, right? It took me a while to learn this expression, but I got it. Sarah is here to correct me. How do you do your audits? How do you fight corruption? There's corruption everywhere, except in my country, of course, which in some cases is serious impediment. And it's very hard to even start reform. That's how that cancer has gone. So just to think about that, the performance of the health sector and organization also is embedded in how the whole government structure is working, how the public sector management is working. Now, who knows what TQ? Shall we just echo a little bit on corruption? Okay. Because that's one area where the World Bank is very big on, so that's why I'm...
But it's very speculative sometimes.
It is very speculative.
Yes,
But
it's perception more than reality sometimes.
what's the corruption in healthcare? Which sector is actually usually perceived as highly corrupt?
Procurement. So real.
Oh, sorry, it's coming. Yeah.
Real corruption is mostly related to public procurement because it's related to procurement of devices or procurement of the medicine, drugs. Because here could be different schemes which is real corrupted. And in this sense, to fight corruption sometimes it's very difficult because when the general culture of the society it's still at the under the level which is expected to be, so very strong legislation and imposing doesn't reach the goals because this should require much more financial burden to different structures should monitor, you know, these different levels of supervisors.
Okay. Supervisors of supervisors and different levels. Fight corruption is extremely good. And particularly because what Pinky was talking about is when we see the problem, we usually go into micro solutions. More audits, more regulations, more policing. That works to a certain extent, but not always.
Yes.
Creating a culture and a structure is actually something on a macro level that works much better to fight corruption than doing this local enforcement measures. And it's a long time battle. And if we had one correct answer, I would love to hear it.
Just other aspect of corruption we have in drug prescription, and sometimes this is related to some schemes which exist between pharmaceutical companies or providers of drugs and some physicians who prescribe some medicine. And the worst part is that it's oversupplying and overusing of drugs, which has health consequences, and of course economical and financial consequences. And finally, this make people to trust much less in the system. And for people, for policymakers, it's very difficult after to explain why we need to change, why we need to push on reform, when society is very reluctant, because they have a lot of examples and present that all initiatives which is started by the policymakers, it's perceived that the new schemes to take our money from the pocket.
Okay, you mentioned several things. One is financial corruption, so the procurement of drugs, who wins the contract and who gives the best price and how much the kickbacks. That's one. You also mentioned prescription practices. If I prescribe more of these drugs, I'll get some kickbacks and I'll benefit. You also mentioned some other aspects of providing care to your friends, more than allies. That's not financial, right? That's also benefiting you or your political party or your family or stuff like that. So the corruption has all these different levels. It doesn't have to be direct financial gain. There was, God, was it the mayor of, mayor of Washington. He was it Washington? I can't remember. Anyway, he was criticized
Marion
for.
Barry.
No, Barry is legendary. But he was, no, it wasn't Barry. Anyway, it will come back. So he was hiring his son-in-law to do the cleaning job and giving contracts to his family members, and he was criticized. But he said, well, guys, if I can't help to my family, who am I going to help to? What's wrong with that? If I can give a job and contract to my family members, what's the point? We like our president. So it has quite a few challenges that to improve public finance management, and I hope next course we will have a session on public finance management as a separate. It's difficult to put everything into 8 days course. It's actually 6 days, and the rest is elective sessions. To address so many variables in the health sector reforms and performance of the health sector. So, for the sake of time, let me move a little bit faster. So, TQM, CQI. Huh? Can't hear. There's no microphone. Any other term in addition to?
Total quality management, continuous improvement management.
Good. What is total quality management? You manage quality or you manage totality?
No, you try to improve the processes through which you control the quality.
Okay.
So it's more like a statistical analysis.
So every I think Friday there's a TV show here called Profit. So there's a guy, his name is Marcus Mononis, I think he's Greek companies. Greek. Sounds great, but I think his parents are from Lebanon. He is multimillionaire. He invests in failing businesses. So the business is about to collapse. He has his own money, he comes to see it, and there are 3 things he likes. People who work in that company. Process. Is the process right? And product. If the product is good, you're baking this cake, I like the cake, it's tasting good. Who are the people working there? Are they ready to change, manage? And what's the process of the work? So those are quality managers. And anybody can give us some example of TQM, how that works? Any real story? Has anybody done total quality management or continuous quality improvements? Does anybody have agency for accreditation in quality assurance? How did that work?
The example that I'm familiar with is that for PEPFAR, there's been in the supply chain project across countries, there has been requests for technical assistance in a lot of countries. I can give you the example of Botswana, where I think you've got, you contracted with private groups, I think just to name a few, like the Sigma Apply, to have that done. So it's a whole process where you look at every element in the organization and you map that, time, process. It's a whole process that takes over many months, but I think we've done it many times. Supply chain is a good example of that.
Okay. Our colleague Estelle is from Kyrgyz, and she was team leader for a wonderful project. I think it's a wonderful project. I haven't seen the final report. Trying to improve performance of the hospitals and to check whether different incentives work. But part of that project was also to look at the performance, see the outcomes, see the results. Any few comments on how did the process work? Who were the evaluators? Was it external, internal? Was it international? Did we send a team from Washington to check it, or?
Just few words to answer Nadine's question about the process. So the project was designed following Rwanda model, but given that the context in Kyrgyzstan, which is a post-Soviet country in Central Asia, is different, so we identified what were the issues at the district level hospitals and tried to use the same type of instrument like a balanced scorecard to address those issues.
Can you explain balanced scorecard? This is important.
Yeah, balanced scorecard includes like a number of composite indicators and criteria grouped into 7 categories, like a summary address, and they address structural quality indicators, process, and outcome. So and there was a certain share among the 3 categories. And process for doing this verification was done quarterly. So each quarter there was a team coming to these hospitals consisting of external verification team coming from provincial, like a regional level and national level, plus representatives of professional associations and health insurance fund and Ministry of Health and so on, and development partners. And then there were also peers from other hospitals coming to the third one to learn what is happening. So, and prior to that visit, each hospital had to perform its own self-assessment using the same type of balanced scorecard.
Wow.
And if there was a difference, then they were losing money. So, but by having this self-assessment done, there were kind of processes established within the facility for internal quality processes.
Thank you so much. I thought you mentioned so many times. And when we are talking about Lebanon, actually it's the order of position for, and their headquarters is much bigger than the whole thing. They were self-regulating the sector in Finland. So it's, and there was also nurses. They had their own association.
They're not as powerful as.
No, not even close. Can't find it. All right. We can talk about each one of this in more depth, but let's, for sake of time, just have some concluding thoughts and maybe a few questions. To do these kind of reforms is not easy. You really need to have a good sense of where you're going, what you're doing. It's too many losers and too many winners. Doctors are not happy in praying for changing standards and norms about square meters per doctor, how many doctors can be. People tend to resist reforms. And the political leadership, particularly in my country, have to decide whether they want to benefit from opening new facilities and getting popularity and stuff like that, and service improvement. We have so many examples of this. Bosnia, 10 cantons, 10 ministers, 3 million people. Canton is the size of 20,000 people, 500,000 people. And each one of them wants to have a hospital. If you close the hospital, you're really not a good minister. Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely political. It's totally political. So each canton is independent because of political situation. But each minister at the cantonal level would rather open new services rather than be efficient and close the hospital. That's where the problem is. $1.1 billion in arrears right now for 3.5 million people. Huge. Because if a canton is too small to provide all the services, just go into debt. Borrow the money. Somebody will pay. Private sector. Suppliers. They don't pay taxes. Avoid taxes. Suppliers, they owe them payment for the last 5 years. Yes. Yes. even if you don't pay taxes, like everybody pays taxes, you're penalized by Ministry of Finance. You pay interest rate on the taxes that you don't pay, and the commercial bank gives them loan to pay the penalty to the Ministry of Finance. So it's a complicated story, but I'm just saying that it's the political leadership that does not want to have this change. They want to gain some political gains, and they have to make this decision. There has to be accountability for results, and I talked a lot about that today, because if you don't have the accountability, that system is not producing what it's supposed to, right? The devil's in the detail. This is the same slide that Mickey had. We can talk about many reforms. We can even quote Alto the other day, social insurance, no social insurance. The devil is in the details. So how do you do it? Really is a contextual, and you have to analyze your own country, your own situation, your own pros and cons, and understand the tools that we are giving in this course, how to apply it in the best way. We can give you a paradigm, what happened in other countries, what usually is there to be expected. I think expression here is, if it looks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, probably is a duck, right? So think about this as just a way to improve the performance. So when designing any public health program and reform, one has to consider what will it take to adjust the system and organizations to deliver that reform. Beautiful reform, strategic plan looks excellent. Can we do it? And most of the times, and I have to admit that, with international development agencies, we tend to ignore this. Oh, this is the way to go. Now let's do it. Okay. How are we going to get there? We'll figure out. We have a Ministry of Health, we have Public Health Institute, we have providers, we have smart doctors, and we'll figure it out. And we do not usually consider the steps that are needed to make it happen. And then we get frustrated with most of the programs and reforms that we have designed. Right? We asked about accountabilities for vertical programs. Who is responsible? Huh? That's a story for a bottle of wine, obviously. That discussion.
I thought the essence of pilots is to go through all this and see whether it's working. And if it's not working, the lessons we learned from pilots will now be imputed into the overall reforms. For instance, most of the reforms being introduced in developing countries, most of them will need some legal changes for them to work. I.e. the autonomy issue. In most sectors, you cannot give money directly to the facilities for them to operate. You need to change the legal, the laws in place. And changing laws will require a lot of time for it to happen. And we could just go ahead and do this, and we expect sustainability. So when the financing goes, other people who don't want the law, who don't want the reforms to work, you just tell them, well, it's against the law. And that's it. So I think from pilots, we should, before making the reform general, remove those challenges or bottlenecks that will not allow the reforms to work.
Yeah, pilot is one way to go, definitely. But you have to have your hypothesis. What are you piloting? What is your hypothesis that you're going to achieve? Doing pilot is not easy, because in changing perceptions, perspectives, environment, public finance management, accountability, all of that has to take place if you want your pilot to work, right? And then it was at least 2 projects I was involved in where we started the pilot and then the authorities said, no, it's against the law, we don't recognize this minister's decision to allow it because that was a previous one. In fact. Let me tell you a joke. So, I like jokes. So our colleagues in transport decided to help 2 countries do the reform of their transport. So instead of driving on the left-hand side, you're going to move and drive to the right-hand side, right? 3 years preparation, public campaign, advertisements, traffic lights, road signs. So country number 1 decided January 1st at midnight, all cars will go from left side to the right side. The signs will be uncovered, the others will be covered. And then country number 2 decided, well, we're going to go step by step. January 1st at midnight, only 20-ton trucks will move to the other side. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So the pilots can have a wonderful experience and give you a lot of valuable lessons, and they're doing it in quite a few countries. Right? No, it's not Ukraine, I promise you. But it has its challenges on how do you implement it. And I remember Professor in China. Oh my God. And he said, oh Nadine, we are doing this pilot's insurance. So, okay, how many enrollees do you have? Oh, it's a small, it's 70 million people only. Like, pilot? Right? You know about that? Okay. Yeah, small pilots. How many people do you have in your state?
10 million.
10 million, no. So doing all of this is really dependent how do you design your reform and where do you go from that. And please take this note. Devil is in the details. Careful planning. Yes. So we understood this. This is a Bosnian, Turkish, Albanian, Macedonian, Serbian, whatever, coffee, Balkans. Kosovo. Soon to be Nigeria. And thank you guys so much. I hope the message is clear.